Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think it's safe to say there's a lot of curiosity on the side of the ball for Georgia's offense as we head towards the 2020 season. New quarterback, new offensive coordinator, maybe a need an upgrade in productivity given how things played out in 2019. That's probably all fair to say. But while the curiosity may rest on that part of the Dogs game plan, there is clearly, from a national standpoint, an identity built around the Georgia defense. That's the way that people think of Georgia heading into this upcoming season. And I think if you brought in a bunch of folks who maybe not necessarily inside the bubble of Dog Nation, but people who follow college football pretty close and said, hey, if Georgia wins the national championship this year, how is it that the Dogs will get it done? And the answer to that question almost certainly would be, well, because of this great defense, that defense will propel UGA. That's just how Georgia's known right now, and certainly it seems like, with good reason, you kind of think of the Dogs that way. Let me give you another example of this, and I'll get more into these numbers later on in the show. The truth is, some of the math stuff, the analytic stuff is kind of over my head. I don't completely understand it all, but I do think it's interesting. It's just another voice in the sport, and there's a guy named Bill Conley who works for ESPN.com, and he does his SP+, which is kind of a mathematical ranking of things, and some of the things he uses: returning production, recent recruiting, recent impact on the field, and you kind of combine all that together and you get some numbers. Well, according to Conley, going into the upcoming season, the Georgia defense, number one, ahead of Oregon at 2, Auburn at 3, Wisconsin 4, Ohio State 5, but Georgia at number 1 overall. And when Conley from ESPN tweeted this yesterday, he said something very interesting. And I think this quote is something that Georgia fans are going to like. He says Dogs are going to be terrifying on defense this year. Full-on 2011 Bama-style boa constrictor. Pretty interesting description there from Bill Conley from ESPN.com. Not just that Georgia on paper, numerically speaking, is the preseason number 1 defense in the country, but the style with which Georgia plays, the kind of talent which Georgia might employ, would rank Georgia in comparison to the best defenses in recent memory, at least according to Bill Conley, ESPN. So I thought it might be fun on our program off the top here for a moment to kind of talk about exactly what the recipe for all that will be. How is it that Georgia will kind of get to where it kind of needs to go as the top defense in the country? If it does play out that way, if this defense is as good as Bill Conley suggested it can be, how exactly do you get there? Well, let me start on the secondary here for a moment, because one of the names that we've mentioned a good bit here in these discussions is Richard LeCounte. LeCounte's decision to come back, and it probably was a choice. There was certainly a chance that LeCounte could have really gotten himself a lot of attention in NFL draft circles, but he has decided to come back to UGA. And that decision by LeCounte to stay in Athens, to play during his senior season, did not go unnoticed. ESPN, again, when it put out its way too early All-American rankings for the upcoming season, gave LeCounte a nod as an All-American safety. We've talked about that before, but in light of what Bill Conley says about the Georgia defense, probably worth revisiting that Chris Lowe, when he wrote that All-American article, said that LeCounte's versatility and experience are big reasons Georgia should be plenty salty on defense in 2020. So we've got terrifying and salty as the ESPN descriptions for this defense right now. He says his decision to return for senior season was huge for that Dog secondary. 2 seasons as starter, LeCounte forced 9 turnovers, 4 interceptions last season included. He's also got a knack for making things happen on defense, whether he's roaming as a center fielder and getting picks or coming up big to make forced fumbles. That's Chris Lowe kind of talking about Richard LeCounte, the potential All-American safety. And I think the real theme for what Lowe brings up there when it comes to a LeCounte is the fact that experience for him is going to matter. Being able to, now Lowe doesn't say this in the ESPN article, but it's something that Georgia fans have an understanding of, that being able to be in the role that J.R. Reed was in a year ago. Reed kind of always had that sort of elder statesman vibe as Georgia's leader in that safety group, and now he's moving on to the NFL, and LeCounte kind of steps in there to that spot. And experience on defense, especially in the secondary, is something that Georgia coach Kirby Smart has talked about before. And if this defense really will be, as Chris Lowe says, salty, or as Bill Conley says terrifying. Experienced guys in the secondary might really matter, LeCount included. But he's not the only one who has that experience. A year older version of Tyson Campbell, a year older version of DJ Daniel and Tyreek Stevens. And all these guys in their own way kind of put up some stats a year ago. Obviously, Eric Stokes continues to do really good things there in that regard. In fact, if you want to go back to last year near the end of the season, when Smart was reflecting on why the 2019 defense had kind of turned out to be a little different than the 2018 defense. I think most people would probably say even better than the 2018 defense was. The role that experience played in all of that, of giving Dan Lanning, the defensive coordinator, some freedom to do some different things, is one of the things that Smart cited. Let me give you an example of that going back to November.
I think Dan's done a good job. This is no knock on Mel because I'm as much responsible for it as anything. Dan's done a good job of bringing, whether it's new ideas, less risk averse. We got secondary back. I mean, when you got a new secondary and you got true freshmen or sophomore that haven't played back there making a lot of calls. Last year's defense was almost so completely new because if you go back to the year before that, there were kids that had played for 3 and 4 years off that team that went to the national championship. So it was a tough year defensively, man. You were holding on every time somebody moved or motioned. This year, you feel more comfortable being aggressive, and we're reaping the benefits of experience.
So think about this for a moment. If Smart would say that last year, the 2019 season, that Georgia felt more comfortable defensively because it was more experience with the secondary, then how much more true is that going to be this upcoming season? Yes, as I've mentioned before, J.R. Reed won't be there, but Tyson Campbell, when he's been healthy, he's played a good bit now. DJ Daniel on the field a lot. Eric Stokes is now kind of a seasoned veteran there in that spot. If freedom was earned for other decisions on defense and other opportunities for playmakers on defense because you trusted a little bit older secondary in 2019, then it stands to reason that would be even more true coming up in 2020. And the notion that the Georgia defense, to once again use Conley's word, could be terrifying. In Kirby's own kind of description of how that process may take place, it becomes a little bit easier to imagine that. But the next phase for all of this is you've got to find a way for, we just spent a bunch of time talking about, sort of back four type guys or, 5 defensive backs when you have the star on the field in that situation. But you've got to also find an opportunity for those front 7 guys to do something kind of special for you. For some of those guys who are also a little bit young, now getting older, to make a big impact. And it becomes also pretty easy to believe that could happen this upcoming season as well. I thought that Mike Griffith had a really good piece, for instance, at DawgNation.com here on this Friday morning, looking at what Pro Football Focus said about Georgia's true freshmen from a year ago and kind of who outshone their competition on the field when they got a chance to play. And one of the names that gets mentioned is rising sophomore linebacker Nakobe Dean, who was obviously a true freshman a year ago. Mike Griffith quotes Pro Football Focus this way. Let me read you Mike's piece from DawgNation.com. It says Georgia inside linebacker Nakobe Dean was also the top-rated true freshman at his position, according to Pro Football Focus. And the article says that it wasn't close. So that, according to Pro Football Focus, and you can take those numbers, to whatever extent of seriousness you want to, but obviously they do this for a living, and they say that Nakobe Dean was the best inside linebacker freshman that we saw. And if you're looking for that guy to take the next step in his career in 2020, Dean seems like as good a candidate as anyone, with no disrespect to Azeez Ojulari, who's already a good player in his own right. Nolan Smith the same way. You'd probably add Jermaine Johnson in that mix. You'd certainly mention Trayvon Walker. But start thinking about Nakobe Dean. It really could be an interesting situation for the Dogs here in 2020. An experienced secondary, and Smart's told us how important that is, giving the freedom for playmakers in the front 7 to do a lot more than maybe we've seen from the Georgia defense. Dan Lanning not being so risk-averse, to once again use a phrase we heard Kirby Smart use a moment ago, that you really could dial these interesting, dynamic playmakers up in really aggressive ways. Dean is an inside linebacker, Nolan and Jermaine Johnson as outside linebackers, Trayvon Walker is a defensive lineman, to say nothing of some of the other guys who are also kind of in that mix there as well. The notion of Georgia being terrifying on defense is certainly a fun thing to think about, especially when you go to Tuscaloosa in September and playing Auburn earlier in the year, this year in October. To really put a dynamic, dominant defense on display would take some pressure off the offense to be as good as maybe it needs to be for Georgia to be a true national championship contender. I know this. I can't wait for spring practice. I want to see these guys on the field. Can't wait for G-Day to kind of have a chance to put this on display. But it's the real season when all of this is going to be really out there for everyone to see. And it should be for UGA fans a whole bunch of fun. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, Facebook. I told you before, when it comes to being live on YouTube, we're having a little bit of an issue. It's supposed to be fixed. It's not. That's kind of the way it goes sometimes. We will have the show up on YouTube, just not available live, and I apologize for that. Twitter, of course, as always. Podcast, as always. Our friends in Athens on the radio, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev. Always love being with them. That's true today, as per usual. We're just really glad to have you with us, and we really appreciate Kroger for making it all possible. By the way, speaking of Kroger, today is Valentine's Day. And if you're like me, you're kind of a last-minute shopper. It's the opportunity for Valentine's shopping's not done until Valentine's Day is over. Well, the good news is Kroger still got you covered here. So let me tell you some of the things you can take advantage of. Go do this right now. Sneak away during lunch or get off work early, whatever else. You can get freshly picked ways to make this Valentine's Day really special. I'm talking about Bloomhouse Dozen Roses, just $20. Bouquets starting at just $12.99. Rose arrangement starting at just $39.99. Listen, you got to get ready to get going on this. Not too late to do it. Do that at your local Kroger here today. It's Jeff Sintel here coming up in just a couple of minutes. A lot of recruiting stuff to talk about with Jeff. Some news and some movement with a big-time running back for the class of 2021. We will deal with that here coming up in just a minute. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And one of the things I've had some fun doing here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, is kind of highlighting some of what Georgia has released when it comes to the early enrollees. Guys from the program giving us a chance to learn a little bit more about them. I want to highlight Kendall Milton, the running back, here for a moment. Now, Milton's a guy that around DawgNation, we've had a chance to hear from a pretty good bit. Jeff Sintel's had a great relationship with him. We published his commitment video when he pledged to Georgia and obviously kind of followed his recruitment in his senior season all the way around. And yet, nonetheless, it's still fun to hear more from him now that he's been on campus there at the University of Georgia. Let me start with this as we're around the doghouse. Kendall Milton telling DJ Shockley in a video you can see at georgiadogs.com of exactly why it was that ultimately he made the decision, and given the fact this was a very contested recruitment for a while, why it was that he ultimately chose UGA. Here's Kendall Milton.
I would just say it felt like home. It felt like the family atmosphere that I was looking for. All the coaches, they kind of, was on my visits. They kind of treated me as their own, and that kind of stuck out to me. I knew this would be a place where they would hold me accountable to everything, but also help me, reach greatness and reach the level that I want to get to. So, I felt confident that this was the place for me and the best opportunity to get where I need to go. Another
interesting clip from Kendall Milton. You see his highlights. You see him kind of make guys miss. There's a certain shiftiness that he kind of brings to the table. And yet, if you saw him on, was it Wednesday night when Georgia was getting just absolutely drilled by South Carolina in basketball, they brought out all the early enrollees and kind of congratulated them at the half there. And, man, there's a lot of beef on that frame for Milton already. He was a pretty big guy even as a high school player, but gotten even bigger since he's been at the University of Georgia. And Milton in this same interview said that really that size dimension that he brings to the table might be something that the average fan or someone who only follows this stuff casually, Milton says, you may not know that about me as much as you probably should. More from Kendall.
A lot of people, they watch my film, they watch me make people miss in space, me outrun people. But a lot of people don't know that I'm 6'2", 220. So I would say my combination of, the size, but along with the speed and the agility and everything like that, I feel like that separates me as a player on the field.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think that's the kind of thing that, for those of us who followed his highlights as a high school senior out in California, that's something we all had a chance to kind of see with our own eyes. And speaking of that, Milton, maybe you could say a little bit of a culture shock when you've lived out west, when you've been in California, you come down here to the SEC, you come to the state of Georgia. There is certainly a feeling around the sport down here that is just different than it is probably other places, certainly California included. And Milton said, not so much culture shock for him, but maybe a motivational force to want to fit in a place where college football is taken so seriously. Here is more from Kendall Milton on that.
It seems like out here people, in a sense, want to go get it more. When I came out here, it kind of motivated me to have that same mindset and come out here and, basically do anything necessary to get what you want. So I'll say it's the mindset out here that, sets it apart.
I love that from Kendall Milton. I do think it's a different mindset. I think the fact that Milton's already noticed that, I think, is a really good thing. I mean, the fact of the matter is you can look at, we talked about those Bill Connelly SP Plus numbers a moment ago. There are 6 SEC teams in the top 11. how else do you explain that other than college football is just taken more seriously here? Elite athletes are just pushed to be better here, not just in Georgia when I say here, but in the kind of SEC country footprint. It's just a bigger deal here than it is other places. And the guys who come here to be tested by that are just better overall guys because of that. So I love that there from Kendall Milton. And I've got one more clip I'm going to play from Milton a little bit later on. I don't have time to get into it right now. But if you like the mindset that Milton's bringing to the table, and for him, that mindset's going to be just as important as anything to speak of athletically. Everybody who Georgia recruits for the most part is going to have the athletic specs. It's what you do from a mindset, psychological standpoint that sets you apart from the rest. And Milton's giving you some clues that he may be built a little differently when it comes to that kind of thing. So we'll let you hear more from Kendall before we're done. It's DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. For now, on a Friday, one of the things that we love to do is get up to date on all the things happening when it comes to UGA recruiting. So let's do that right now as we get ready to welcome in our buddy, Jeff Sintel. And we'll get Jeff coming up here in just a moment. We'll get ready to rock and roll with him. Sounds like Jeff is ready to go. All right, so we'll roll on and do that now. And, of course, it's great to have all of you with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Hello to Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger on a Friday. Jeff loved the brand new format for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger this past week. 6 p.m. start for that now. Chance to interact with more recruits. And, boy, you can talk about a big one to kick things off with. Cedric Von Granger making an appearance on Wednesday. How much fun did you have talking to that young man on Wednesday night and kind of bringing that to people in kind of a new way on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger?
Yeah, hey, first of all, good morning, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody out there. Cedric, when we're talking about Cupid and hearts and everything like that today, you talk about a player that Georgia fans, if they don't love already, they should probably love pretty soon. That's Cedric Von Granger. The simplest things usually are the most effective. That's one of the realest, most down-to-earth, centered young men I've ever covered on his way to Georgia, and it's only fitting that he's going to play the center position.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And obviously there's been a lot of news here over the course of the last couple of days. I want to make sure we kind of touch on all of that and kind of get that. Let me start with Evan Pryor, the 2021 running back. I get the impression that running back's going to be a big part of our conversation together, Jeff, here in 2021. It usually is around UGA. Maybe even a tick more so for the 2021 cycle. Pryor has included Georgia as a finalist along with North Carolina and Penn State and USC, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. I guess just kind of give me an idea here, Jeff, where things stand with Pryor, but also kind of just broaden this out a little bit and kind of set the board for us here when it comes to running back recruiting. I know we've talked about Will Shipley. We've talked about some of these names already. Lavassier Carroll has been really dropping a bunch of hints on Twitter, it would seem, in the last little bit. Just kind of give me that thumbnail for 2021 running back recruiting, Pryor included, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I guess let's start from the 10,000-foot salesman-type view right here. Zamir White, he has a good season. I'm pretty sure he's going to be bound for the NFL, especially given his injury history. James Cook is also going to be definitely exploring his professional opportunities after his junior year, especially with a stout junior year as well. So, to me, that tends to, safe bet to say Georgia's going to need two running backs. And I think the way all these cycles are lining up, Brandon, everybody wants to be done by the summer. They want to be done before their senior season. So, is this a case of the first two guys to say yes, the first two guys Georgia will take a yes from and, dust your hands off with some chalk and be done with it? I think that might be the case. You mentioned Will Shipley. That's the guy I start with and lead with, simply because I think he's the best fit for Georgia in terms of a guy that can be dynamic, can catch the ball out of the backfield, can run between the tackles, can perform at a high level. He's a 5-star, more of an all-purpose back type there, though. I think he has a lot of the same skill sets that DeAndre Swift gave Georgia for those 3 great years in Athens. But that said, that's going to be some tough sledding for Will Shipley. I don't think Georgia's the leader. I think Georgia might be second or third right there for Will Shipley if we had to get down to brass tacks. Clemson, Notre Dame, those are schools that are really big in it there for Will Shipley. The remainder of the upper crust of the picture looks like 3 running backs to me with strong ties to the state of Georgia. Lavassier Carroll is out of Warren County. Warrenton, Georgia. That's near Augusta. He spent the last year at IMG Academy in Bradenton. He will spend his senior season there as well. That's a guy that's kind of a blend of a lot of guys. He's got sprinter speed, got some good size. He's faced some elite high school competition. That's a name to know, Evan Pryor. You want to talk about a guy that reminds folks a lot of, a guy that can just blur up and down the field. That's Evan Pryor. He's got a lot of the same skill sets that Will Shipley does. Maybe a little track faster than Will Shipley, but both of these guys are incredibly fast. Will's only about 190, 195. He's about 5'9.5". That's Evan Pryor, 5'9.5", 195. And the last name is a big name in the state of Georgia, a player you can't help but appreciate, be impressed by. That's Big Cody Brown. That's out of Parkview High School in Lilburn. Cody Brown just really turned the Georgia high school state playoffs last year into a kind of personal showcase for him. I love what he stands for on and off the field. He's got a 4.0 grade point average. Georgia is definitely in the mix with him there as well. And so right now it seems like Shipley, Carroll, Brown, and Pryor, those are the names to know at running back. And after that, I think the board for Georgia, as we talked about on Hedges, there's two positions. There's backer, linebacker, outside, inside linebacker, and running back that seem, as they should be, that seem very cloudy at this point.
So just to follow up on this here for a moment, Cody Brown from Parkview is a good bit bigger than, like, say, Shipley is, and Evan Pryor, who we were just talking about a moment ago. So to focus in on Shipley and Pryor for a moment, maybe this is a more relevant question for Shipley than it is for Pryor, but if I'm trying to picture these guys in my mind, obviously I can think of throwing the ball to Will Shipley, but can I also give him 20 carries? And I guess the same thing for a guy like Pryor as well. Can you line up and, you made the comparison to DeAndre Swift. Swift is a guy that could handle 20 carries a game. Georgia just didn't do that with him nearly as much because of the rest of the depth that it had in the running back spot for most of the time that he was here. Are Pryor and Shipley, are they potentially 20 carry a game type guys, or are they more in that kind of James Cook mold?
Well, I think they're more in the mold that everybody expects or hopes and crosses their fingers that James Cook will be at Georgia eventually in his career. I think Shipley and Pryor are 20-touch-a-game guys, but I don't know if any smart offensive coordinator, no pun intended there, would use those guys with 20 touches. Traditionally, downhill I formation, toss sweep type stuff. Both Shipley and Evan Pryor, Brandon, got they're the type of player that can catch 30, 45 balls in a high school season. Will Shipley averaged 17 yards per reception last year and basically went slot receiver every other series for a Weddington High School state championship team in North Carolina. They just give Georgia something different. When you have Kendall Milton there and you have Kenny McIntosh, those are bigger backs, 210 pounds and up. If you saw Kendall Milton waving those kind of slabs of granite arms at the South Carolina basketball game halftime, you'd be smart to notice, again, no pun intended there again, but you'd be smart to notice that put on like 15 pounds since he's been at Georgia for a little over a month. He's right now at 227. The plan is to play Kendall at around 230 pounds. So you've got that big back with McIntosh covered, and definitely you've got that big back with Kendall Milton covered. So who are that flash guy, that thunder and lightning guy? Who's that guy that can take that 6-yard carry, get a block, and turn it into a 70-yard carry? That's a Pryor. That's a Shipley. I think Carroll's kind of a blend of both of the styles. I still remember Cody Brown telling me a story about when Del McGee's been recruiting him last season. He was in for a game, and he pointed him around the running back room and the running backs on the roster, and he said Del McGee told Cody Brown said that he would be the biggest back on the team last year if he was on the team last year at 220 plus. I think Cody Brown's a guy that would be a lot kind of a similar player skill set to a Kendall Milton.
So we're talking about Cody Brown from Parkview High School. Barrett Carter from North Gwinnett High School has been a big name so far over the last few days. He dropped his top 11 the other day. I certainly get the sense, Jeff, and I talked about this a little bit on the show yesterday, I certainly get the sense this 2021 class may have a little bit more of an in-state flair than maybe the last couple of recruiting cycles have had for Georgia. And, Jeff, you know how I feel about this. I'm not saying that national recruiting is bad. Obviously, some of my favorite recruits from Georgia are the ones that came in for the 20 class, and a lot of those are guys from outside the state of Georgia. There's something really, really good and fun about national recruiting, but I also believe there can be something really fun when you're able to talk to people who live in Lilburn who can tell you about Brown, or people who live in Swanee. We know, plenty of people who've, kind of seen Carter a lot here, and you get the same thing down in South Georgia with, Dejon Edwards from the last class. You can kind of think about some examples like that. Do you get the sense that we're going to be talking about Georgia guys in the 2021 class a bit more than maybe we have the last couple of cycles for Georgia?
Yeah, and first of all, I can see a couple of bumps in the road or potholes in the road for that theory you're setting up there, Brandon. When you start mentioning a couple of young men, from Gwinnett County, I can hear Brandon start worrying about Georgia's track record in Gwinnett County and how hard it is to pull elite guys in there. But here's what I think, Brandon, and I think maybe you probably agree with me. Maybe it's some refined taste for the Georgia board and what it would look like. I think more people don't mind if the best players are signed and the best players are courted and the best players are recruited heavily and prioritized. But I'm sure that a lot of folks wouldn't mind if those best players in the class are also coming from the state of Georgia. I would still look towards this class, and those way too early mocks I kind of keep to myself. But I get the sense that might still be 15 to 10 in terms of out-of-state, in-state prospects, where the majority will be out-of-state once again. But I think more of those 10 are going to be some more of those five-star types, some more of those best players that Georgia potentially signs in 2021. Whereas you saw late in the 2020 cycle with names like Austin Blasky and Ladd McConkey and Dejon Edwards and Cameron Kinney, a lot of those late additions that Georgia added, which were basically based on the strength of the senior year evaluation and what those young people did on film, a lot of those guys came from the state of Georgia and then were those homegrown Bulldogs. But I think the trend is always going to be what it is. Georgia's going to get the very best players it possibly can. There's a lot of big names popping up for Georgia potentially in this class from Florida, from North Carolina. You still got California in the mix there as well. Texas is in the mix there as well. So there's a lot of guys in this class where Georgia's going to, fly all over to go see the best of the best. Arizona's even popping up again this cycle as well. But I think there'll be more of those elite players that Georgia does better with in this cycle. And that's evidenced by already having David Daniel and Brock Vandergriff in the class, and also chasing guys like Micah Morris, Terrence Ferguson, Amarius Mims, Cody Brown, Lavassier Carroll, and players of that top.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. There's another in-state name I want to talk to you about here in just a moment. Before that, though, let me remind you that coming up pretty soon, DawgNation Daily going to be out on the road. No pun intended here. At the 38th Annual Atlanta International Auto Show. It's going to return to the Georgia World Congress Center, Building C. It goes February 26th through March 1st. We're going to be there live on Friday, February 28th. We'll be there when the doors open at noon, so please come by and see us. Now, the auto show, you know all about this. Latest new cars, SUVs, trucks. 24 manufacturers going to be represented. There's also always the really fun special attractions. How about Cousin Eddie's RV from Christmas Vacation? That's going to be there. Exotic cars, some caffeine and octane, and a whole lot more. Tickets, adult tickets just $12. Kids 6 through 12 are just $6, and kids 5 and under are free. Also, discounted tickets for heroes and seniors. The website, GoAutoShow.com. That's right, visit GoAutoShow.com for a whole lot more. We'll see you Friday, February 28th at the Atlanta International Auto Show there at the Georgia World Congress Center. So, Jeff, one of those in-state names for Georgia is Brock Vandergriff. And another theory I've kind of kicked around here the last couple of days is one of the things that I think is going to make the 2021 recruiting cycle really fun is the presence of a five-star quarterback. And it seems to me that Vandergriff's going to kind of want to defend his turf there on that and make a case for himself as the best quarterback in the country, and he's going to be a competitor in that regard, which gives him a chance to also rub elbows with other recruits. I've always been of the big belief that these 5-star quarterbacks can have coattails. They can be, to use the familiar phrase, they can be Pied Pipers in a recruiting class. And I think it could be really fun now that Vandergriff, the 5-star, is already in the fold for Georgia, to watch how that plays out as we get ready for these warm weather months where so much of this movement is going to take place. As you mentioned before, I am very interested to see what kind of voice Vandergriff develops on the recruiting trail. That, for me, is going to make this cycle really fun. Do you get a sense of the early stages of how that's going to play out?
Yeah, Brandon. First of all, one of my chief goals for 2020 is always to make this stuff more fun. And, a guy like yourself that's at auto shows and it's a man of the people, I thought it was time to modernize, because we're all about hip and culture here on DawgNation Daily. I think it's time to modernize that Pied Piper term right there. And I'm kind of workshopping a better one, and I'm going to call it the DJ right now, the guy that just makes everything go, at the life of the party type. And I think the biggest thing with Brock I think the biggest thing with Brock is he's a guy that, not just would have the aux cord, so to speak, to use a 90s term, but it's just so beneficial when anybody's coming in, a wide receiver, an offensive lineman, a running back. Brock can be there. Brock can hang out with that guy. It just adds more gravitas to a class, so to speak, when you've got a 5-star quarterback that is a building block and is an anchor for the class. Offensive linemen want to block for him. Running backs want to run behind him. Receivers, tight ends definitely want to be a part of it because they know everybody's ideally would love to win championships and play in big ball games. And you've kind of set to do that coming in when you have one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Brock Vandergriff will pass the eye test. He will pass the sniff test. He's a stout young man, athletic, more athletic than folks might think. He's the type of player that it just gives Georgia the chance for big, big things. And Georgia just proved they can put together a number one signing class without a 5-star receiver, without a 5-star quarterback, and without a 5-star running back. How much easier will that be when you've got a guy that's going to, by anybody's measure, finish as one of the top 20 players in the country, regardless of what happens his senior year? That's a great start for a great class. And you've got a guy like Brock Vandergriff in there really early. Brandon, one of the more fascinating subplots for me of this whole 2020 cycle might be the type that deserves Korean subtitles or something like that for this storyline. But Brock Vandergriff at Georgia, Caleb Williams at Oklahoma, that's what it looks like is going to happen right there. And that's a really quick 2 or 3 month time frame where everything just kind of got flipped around.
Yeah, right. Amazing how fast all that happened so quickly. Something else that had to happen fast for the class of 2020 was Matt Luke doing almost a speed dating version of recruiting to kind of hold on to Brockter Jones and hold on to Cedric Von Granger and, kind of keep Tate Ratledge happy. And for the most part, that all worked out really well. Jeff, I will say that I'm very interested to watch what Luke looks like as a long-range recruiter. Obviously Sam Pittman put a huge stamp on this program, and he's just really good at that. The indication that you get is that Luke is going to be really good at this too. And obviously offensive line names, Micah Morris and Terrence Ferguson and Amarius Mims, they're really important for the upcoming recruiting cycle. To watch Luke get a chance to develop these long-range relationships with them, and I'm not saying that he's going to be, exactly as effective as Sam Pittman was or going to go about his business in exactly the same kind of way, but seeing Luke be kind of a long-range impact recruiter for Georgia in the cycle with some very important offensive line names, I think that's going to be really fun here for the upcoming class as well.
Yeah, Brandon, I think Luke's going to be very good for Georgia because not only is he from the Cutcliffe School where he's got a little bit of the influence from Rich Rodriguez with the spread type stuff there as well, but he's a guy that he has an animated personality. The folks on the recruiting trail that I talked to in the 2020 class and even the 2021 class, they tell me that, to use your speed dating analogy, a lot of people are swiping right really fast on Matt Luke in Georgia because it's just like the Sugar Bowl is a great example. Amarius Mims told me he watched the entire Sugar Bowl because he wanted to see what Matt Luke was like. Now, I don't think Matt Luke knew he was on camera and all recruits everywhere were watching on national television, but everybody got a big sense of his brand right from the jump. They tell me it's kind of a different flavor of a beloved ice cream compared to Pittman and Luke. Maybe Luke's got a little bit more chocolate chips or cookie dough in the middle right there. Pittman was a guy that was cool and chill and fun, but when it's time to work, it's time to work. Well, Luke's sort of like that. But for him, when it's time to work, it's like he just swilled about three Red Bulls and is ready to go to work, man, because he's very animated. He's very fired up. And players, even some really well-grounded players, they get the sense that they really want to play for that guy as well. And the folks on the DawgNation forum, Brandon, have already rendered their verdict. As far as the photo ops go and as far as the photo bombs go and showing up with recruits, looking like he's ready to get on bended knee with some of these guys. Matt Luke's got some skills in the photogenic area in terms of making a warm and happy picture with a recruit.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Let me finish with this, if you don't mind. Talk to me about Quentin Somerville here for a moment. Obviously, really good piece with him up at DawgNation.com, and it is undeniable the impact that Keely Ringo has made on Somerville. Obviously, Ringo loves his college choice, and it seems like, based on your own story, he's kind of done a pretty good job of explaining that to Somerville. But the part of this I guess I'm curious about, is this just good luck? I mean, is Saguaro High School historically putting out good players? I don't know a lot about Arizona high school football, I'll admit. But to have Ringo and now Somerville on the same team and Georgia's relationship with Ringo potentially impacting Somerville, was this all part of a diabolical plan, or did it just so happen that Georgia found itself a nice little spot out there in Arizona for this recruitment? You know, kind of how has all this kind of played out?
Man, that's a fascinating story. First of all, Brandon, it's kind of like you got to thank the demise of USC, UCLA a little bit, and all those Pac-12 programs that have a lot of trouble creating these big balance sheets that the Big Ten and the SEC has. It just seems that SEC football is thriving, and for Somerville specifically, it's a head scratcher, man. Because what is that show? I think it's on Netflix. A series of unfortunate events. Well, Georgia's benefiting from a series of fortunate events with Quentin Somerville because way years ago, back when he was 6 years old, Brandon, he's watching television and he's seeing A.J. Green making plays in front of a packed house at Georgia.
Yeah.
He sees the fervor, the passion, and he's like, you know what? Georgia is a spot. And he started dreaming about it. I'd love to grow up and be good enough to play football at a place that does it like Georgia. And that stuck with him. And he grows up, and you have Arizona State, maybe what they are, UCLA, USC, the type of programs that used to get a player like this. And maybe those are not having their best years over the last 4 or 5 years. And you have Keely Ringo, who's going to be a keystone recruit in the state of Georgia for now because he's a national recruit, the nation's #1 cornerback. As I wrote this week in our overview of the 2020 class, he's the highest-rated defensive back or cornerback that Kirby Smart has ever signed. So you have that 12 years ago infatuation with Georgia. You have Georgia playing well, winning Rose Bowls, increasing its national footprint to go out and get guys, to get a Keely Ringo. And now you can bank on, you can basically put, I'll back up from the word bank here, but you can look at that. You can look at the connection there with Ringo, the connection with him watching A.J. Green catch passes from years ago and a dream he had for Georgia. And it seems like a series of these coincidences are all lining up where Georgia is now a major player. The personality of Dan Lanning. I mean, the young man, what struck me, Brennan, in years and years of doing this is when Quentin Somerville, a young man out of Arizona, gets a Georgia offer. We know what a stock, blessed and thankful to receive the offer from the University of Georgia tweet looks like. We've seen those a million times. Somerville's response and tweet to that was 1 out of a million. And then when you get him on the phone and you just listen to him talk about Georgia, about Kirby Smart, about Dan Lanning, and he knows the game. His older brother is the recruiting coordinator now at New Mexico State and a position coach at New Mexico, coaches wide receivers, one of the youngest position coaches in college football. He knows the game. He knows what the cells should feel like. But then he goes to an SEC town and sees the way football is celebrated, and it's a big deal, and the town comes alive. You could just hear him articulate these things, Brandon, and it sounds like from the moment you get on the phone with Quentin Somerville and you talk to him about Georgia, you can just read. The young man is smiling. He's got a big, happy smile on his face. He's laughing a lot. I won't say, maybe this is Cupid, but I would say definitely Cupid has definitely wedged an arrow somewhere in the wheelhouse for Quentin Somerville right now and how he feels about Georgia. Because if you listen to him, if you read the quotes on DawgNation.com, this is a young man that is definitely highly interested in Georgia right now.
Well, it's a good place to finish our conversation because it really shows you kind of the best of both worlds. I mean, I'll admit there's a little bit of, as I mentioned earlier, a special place in my heart for those guys who are, playing high school football near where I grew up in this state, and yet I still want Georgia to make room for a guy like Somerville from Arizona, much the same way Keely Ringo traveled that path. For a guy like that who dreams of playing in the SEC, who am I to not provide that opportunity for him? So if there was room to take them all, Jeff, I'd take them all. National guys, in-state guys, and everything else in between, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's kind of like the B.J. Ojulari decision from last year. Georgia didn't really need a lot of outside linebackers because they recruited so well in the past. They settled on Mikhail Sherman as their outside backer, and a guy like B.J. Ojulari would have, just winds up at LSU, whereas he was in this recruiting cycle, he would have been prioritized a lot different because Georgia needs to take more outside backers in this class. There's a lot of guys they're looking at for that kind of outside linebacker position. Dallas Turner, a young man we'll write about soon on DawgNation.com, out of South Florida is another guy that comes to mind. They're going to get a couple more outside linebackers than they did last year because it's time to, because they didn't load up on outside linebacker a year ago. It's just kind of the ebbs and flows of the recruiting cycle. But that Somerville thing there, there's a chain link of everything happening here that it certainly seems like it's paving the road another 2,000 miles or so from Saguaro High School to Athens, Georgia. He already says he wants to give Georgia an official. He already says he wants to come back for an unofficial. His sister loves it. That's just good work already on the recruiting trail, where Georgia was getting in a very good spot with Quentin Somerville out of Arizona in the 2021 class, when a lot of schools are still trying to nail down the final big bricks of their 2020 class.
That's exactly right, Jeff. That's really good stuff. Thanks for being here on our program today, Jeff. We'll look forward to reading a lot from you. The forum at forum.dawgnation.com, DawgNation.com, Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. New time now, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Thanks for spending some of that time with us here on DawgNation Daily here today. And as I said before, have a great weekend. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
All right, guys. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. And even though your Valentine says don't do too much, do too much, because that's what they really mean. That's a little bit of advice right there. When somebody says, you don't have to, no, you have to, because Valentine's is sort of all about making sure that special someone makes sure that they feel like they are loved. So, hey, guys, appreciate it. Brandon, thanks for having me.
All right, good PSA, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, always fun to have Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily. Really good stuff from him there. And good advice, by the way, as well, to step over and go by Kroger and make sure you got your Valentine taken care of, because no matter what they say, as Jeff said, they may still want something nice here this Valentine season. Of course, Kroger can certainly do that for you. Let me transition now. Let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean for a moment. And one of my favorite things about a Royal Caribbean cruise, and my family, we've been talking about these cruise ships and the fact we got to get on one of these here pretty soon and go enjoy a fabulous vacation. And one of the things that really make them fabulous, really one of the things that makes a Royal Caribbean cruise, but the boldest vacation choice you can make, is the entertainment you get while you're at sea on the ship. Royal Caribbean is the only cruise line offering awe-inspiring, Tony Award-winning Broadway musicals. You got full-scale productions on all these ships. I'm talking about Hairspray, Grease, Mamma Mia, Cats. Those are some of the Broadway shows you can see. You've also got the Aqua Theater shows, Olympic-level high diving at sea. That's a very, very difficult thing to do, but they make it happen there. Just an amazing, amazing thing on those Oasis-class ships. You got the ice skating shows and kind of everything else. It is just an unbelievable vacation experience. So you got to check it out. It's been awarded Best Entertainment by Travel Weekly, so Reader Choice Awards. That gives you an idea of just how good all of this really is. So contact your travel advisor or reach out to my friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. You can call them 800-326-4971. That's 800-326-4971. But be sure you tell them you heard about them on DawgNation Daily. One of the things that Jeff said a moment ago that I thought was kind of interesting about Matt Lucas' personality, we've already seen him on the field. I'm talking about on the sidelines of the SEC, or I should say the Sugar Bowl. He was a little bit more animated than you've kind of seen Sam Pittman being in the past. Pittman during practice, and when I'm not in Athens very much. And when you do go, you don't get to see a lot of practice. But, one of the things that you notice about Pittman is he's a little bit like, you guys like movies. You ever watch Goodfellas? Paul Sorvino's character in Goodfellas, where they say that he moves slow because he didn't have to move fast for anybody. That was always kind of my thought about Sam Pittman. He sort of moved slow because he was just comfortable enough in his own skin, had enough gravitas that he didn't have to move fast for anybody. It seems like Luke's got a little bit more of a motor maybe than Pittman does. That's not a better thing or a worse thing. It's just a different type of thing. And you may see some of that, or we may see some of that during spring practice and be able to convey some of that to you of what a Luke practice feels like for offensive linemen compared to what a Sam Pittman practice has kind of felt like. So we mentioned before, as we're cruising on the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, that ESPN, Bill Connolly put out the SP Plus preseason numbers. Some of you like the math stuff. Some of you don't. Some of you, kind of get into the analytics. Others of you don't. Totally understand that. Connolly says it's really based on three things. Returning production. We talked about that a few days ago. Recent recruiting. Obviously, we know what that's all about. And recent history. And I will say that recent history factors into this stuff more than you might realize. That's the one thing I am a believer in. There are 6 SEC teams in the top 11. Alabama's 1, Ohio State is 2, Clemson is 3, Georgia's 4, best defense in the country, as we said before preseason, but only, barely cracking the top 35 offensively. Penn State's at 5, LSU's at 6, Florida at 7, Oklahoma at 8, the only Big 12 team represented here. Wisconsin's at 9, Texas A&M at 10, and Auburn at 11. Keep your eye on Texas A&M this season. People have been asking me. I've been pretty good at predicting the surprise SEC West team last couple of years. Aggie's not necessarily my pick to win the West, but in terms of being better than the experts kind of think, keep your eye on Texas A&M. I said about LSU last year, I was right. I said about Auburn in 2017, I was right. Think about Texas A&M here for a moment right now. And as I said before, a couple interesting things here. Alabama ranked number 1 overall in all of this. A lot of people won't, buy into that. Do with that what you will. But if you're expecting Georgia to be a point spread favorite in Tuscaloosa when you play there in September, these numbers, because for the most part the point spreads follow these numbers very closely. For the most part, this tells you that Georgia will be a slight underdog when it plays at Alabama in September. Now, speaking of Alabama and its coach Nick Saban, Detroit News had an interesting piece the other day. So one of the things that's been controversial is Mel Tucker's departure from Colorado and arriving as head coach at Michigan State. The Detroit News saying that Nick Saban played a pretty significant role in all of this. According to the Detroit News, in his conversation with Michigan State officials, Saban is said to have strongly stressed Tucker's recruiting efforts, as well as his ties to the South, which, of course, is a football recruiting hotbed. This is the Detroit News. Tucker was the defensive coordinator at Georgia for 3 seasons. Saban also stressed to Michigan State that a mix of college and NFL coaching experience is a plus, rather than an imbalance of one over the other. So apparently Saban, a pretty big advocate for Mel Tucker on this. Tucker has certainly thanked Saban pretty profusely for helping him get that Colorado job around the first time around, or at least helping prepare him to become a head coach at the college level, maybe the best way to say that. And maybe now also instrumental in transferring from Colorado to Michigan State. So interesting that Saban's going to get a little bit of the credit for that. One more cruise around the SEC story I want to give you. And this is, I don't know if this is a bad thing. It's just amazing how different this is from Georgia. So according to, a bunch of reports coming out of Gainesville, when Florida does its spring practices, they're going to have up to 6 of these spring practices which are open in some form or fashion. 3 of them, I believe, are open to anyone who wants to come. A 4th will be open to season ticket holders only, but that's still tens upon tens of thousands of people. Then you've got like First Responder Day and Faculty and Staff Day and everything else. But man, how different is this from Georgia? I'm not telling you it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's just amazing how this program, it's Georgia's probably chief competition in the SEC East, is holding all of these open practices during the spring. Kirby Smart would rather die than do that. And I think at a certain point, I mean, we've heard of Florida doing like one of these before, I guess, but now to do, up to 3 of them completely open for anyone who wants to come. Obviously, everything changed by being watched and being observed. It certainly you get the feeling these spring practices will be a little bit different. I'm not quite so sure this is the best competitive decision you can make. Maybe Florida's got some fans it's got to win over down there. Maybe there's some tickets that need to be sold here. I don't know what Mullen's doing here, but this many open practices would seem to be just a little bit weird. But for now, we'll make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. Okay, so a little earlier in our show today, we were playing some Kendall Milton audio, and I wanted to save one piece of this because we were a little late off the top of the program. I want to make sure we had full room for all of this. One of the things that Milton also said in the video that was published at GeorgiaDawgs.com is that he and Justin Robinson, the freshman wide receiver, are rooming together. And they've had that kind of like surreal feeling from time to time when they realize, okay, this college career has now started. But listen to the end of this clip for a moment. And I said before that, the guys that Georgia recruits are going to have the physical characteristics necessary to succeed. But ultimately, it may be more of the mental part of this that's the most important. I think this is an example from Milton of the kind of psychological, viewpoint you want to see players approach their college career with. I thought this was really good for Kendall Milton. It's kind of lighthearted and funny, but there's also a serious twist to this at the end. Here's more from Kendall Milton.
Me and Justin, we be in the room together. Sometimes we'll just be talking. We'll be like, dang, like we really in college now. Like, really is. Like this is really here. But we all knew it would happen. So the time's here. So we just got to seize the moment, make the most out of it.
Seize the moment, make the most out of it. Those two short sentences may be the best advice you could ever give to anyone in any walk of life. Certainly for college football players who are only a few of them lucky enough to play at a place like Georgia, and the careers that go by so fast. Those of us who are older, it feels like we were just talking about so-and-so as a recruit. Now he's in the NFL, and Kendall Milton's college career is going to end up going by just as fast. Seize the moment. Take full advantage of it. Really good advice for all of us from Kendall Milton there. I thought that was really good. And, of course, here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, one of the things that we love to do on Friday is we think about Kroger to kind of kick off the weekend. We got folks coming over to our house this weekend, and many of you have got baseball and other kinds of sports. You're getting stocked up for whatever you're doing at your local Kroger. And, of course, one of the things that Kroger also helps us do here is take a look at the other big sports that have action going on this weekend. So let's highlight that right now as a part of our Kroger kickoff. And I am really, really proud to be able to say that today the Diamond Dogs begin their season. They'll be against the Spiders of Richmond all weekend long. Emerson Hancock will toe the rubber today, and then Diamond Dogs all weekend for a team that has a chance to make another big run. So we'll look forward to watching some baseball here. It's men's basketball at Texas A&M on Saturday. Softball's got a couple of things going on this weekend. Texas Tech, UCLA, both those are ranked teams. Track and field's involved in the Tyson Invitational and the Husky Classic here this weekend as well. There are 6 former UGA golfers in the field for the Genesis Open at the old Riviera Country Club in L.A. Harris English right now, early tied for second right now. And, of course, Bubba Watson's been great at this tournament before, so he's in the field here as well. 6 former UGA golfers there in the field at the Genesis Open. So fun stuff all weekend involving UGA athletics, and that's our Kroger kickoff. And by the way, speaking of Kroger, something else to think about tomorrow, Kroger Chef Jr. is on its way back, and it's a really good menu item here this week, cinnamon rolls. How much fun would that be to make some of those? It is tomorrow, February 15th. When you sign up, you get a patch, a recipe card, an apron, a chef hat, a recipe box, and a dough slicer. Just go to KrogerChefJr.com to register for your class today. That's KrogerChefJr.com, and you can register for your class today. Oh, by the way, one more interesting note. So there are some reverberations for Mel Tucker's move to Michigan State. Obviously, the Colorado job is now open, and a head coaching job is, no matter how far the Pac-12 may have fallen, this is still a Power 5 head coaching job, at least in name alone, if nothing else. And there will be some interest. And the San Jose Mercury News has kind of floated some names. And one of the names that got floated, Alabama offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian. Sarkisian, of course, former head coach at Washington, former head coach at USC, so he knows the landscape out west, played his college ball at Brigham Young. So Alabama potentially having to fight to hold on to its offensive coordinator here late in the process, post-signing day, and the need to replace Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback. That could be a story worth watching. For now, though, let's do our Gator Hater Updater. It's been 1,203 days since the lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. We'll see you back here on Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.